Hi, Misha here, and I felt like talking about the X-Wing again. I thought I talked, actually, in really my first video on this Star Wars stuff, about the T-65B, the pretty standard Rebel X-Wing. But I thought we'd talk about the T-70 and the T-85. If you don't know what the T-85 is, well, yeah, there's understandable reasons for that. Anyway, I've got 5 of them laid out here. All but one are from Hot Wheels, but the one outlier being our good old titanium series. Over here we have the concept X-Wing, and then we have the partisan X-Wing from Rogue One, and then we have Wedge's X-Wing from A New Hope, and then we have 2 versions of Poe's X-Wing, one with the S-foils closed and one open. And this one's silver because it's from the commemorative or whatever editions you call it. Now, yeah, this is the concept or prototype X-Wing. A while back, Hot Wheels did kind of a series of concept craft. And this is kind of an early version from A New Hope. Notice the S-foils, the X shape is much more, X-like. Also, at one time, there was a thought of this being a 2-person craft with a turret. Kind of interesting. And there was kind of both technical and logistical reasons why they ended up going to the more compacted version. We're going to come back to this one. And again, this is the pre-Battle of Yavin version we see in Rogue One, used by the partisans. Pretty standard looking, although it does not have an astromech in it. Just a hole for him there. The T-65 started off as a design from Incom for the Empire. They had built the successful ARC 170 and Z-95 Headhunter, but the Empire was going away from kind of high-performance, multi-role craft with hyperdrives. So they weren't terribly interested in this new concept. And Incom had produced some, but when word came down that they were going to be nationalized by the Empire, wouldn't you know it, they lost some of the prototypes and most of the production to the rebellion in a few different stages. And so the first ones, the true T-65s, were Incom built and used by the rebellion before Yavin, but by the time of Yavin they were going to the T-65B version, which was a slightly product improved, basically the full production version, and these started to be made by the rebels themselves, although some made by Incom were around. And the original X-Wing here is about 12.5 meters by 11 3/4 meters wide. Has, of course, 4 laser cannon, and famously, as we know, it had 2 proton torpedo launchers. Each had 3 warheads. Had a pilot in here. Hello. And an R2 unit for navigation and repair behind him. Its S-foils could be open for attack or closed to conserve on energy and give it higher speeds, especially in atmosphere. Incom really liked their S-foils. They did them on a previous aircraft or spacecraft or two, like the ARC 170. 4 engines. It has a Class 1 hyperdrive. The astromech can store up to 10 jumps. In atmosphere, is capable of about 1050 kph, which is reasonably fast for the Star Wars universe, but not very fast for our real world. And of course, it was a multi-role craft. It could have other things besides proton torpedoes, but it took quite a bit of work to make, say, concussion missiles or other types of bombs fit. So it was definitely made for the proton. And this was the mainline spacecraft for the rebels all throughout their existence. It kind of became iconic symbol. Had a very effective targeting computer for directing said torpedoes. Its lasers could be fired in different modes, either singly or in pairs or even all 4 at once. A very flexible, versatile craft. So that's why the rebels kept up with it and produced it in very large S numbers. But a little bit after Endor, even though it acquitted itself very well at Endor, which would have been 4 ABY, sometime the next year, they started work on the next version here, the T-70. And these would be in production, kind of replacing the T-65 in the days of the New Republic, the early days of the Defense Force. Now in specs, it's very similar. It's a little bit smaller, and just about 12.4 meters long and about 11.25 meters wide. It had 4 lasers, slightly improved. Still had an astromech in the back. Still Class 1 hyperdrive. It was a little faster. It had 1100 kph, and because of its somewhat smaller size, it was a little bit more maneuverable too. Still 4 engines. Slightly different styling in the back here. But its big thing was it was more modular. It could mount pods or take different ordnance launchers in the nose. It could easily take concussion missiles, mag pulses, ion bombs, proton bombs, what have you. And that was the big thrust here, was being able to configure it for a mission. It could even have a couple of extra heavy lasers if it needed them. It could even have a small little pop-out blaster on the underside for defense on the ground, kind of like you saw on the Millennium Falcon. So that was its big claim to fame. And it wasn't a lot more expensive. The original T-65 was about 150,000 credits. This was about 200,000 credits to produce. And it would be made by a new post-Civil War conglomerate known as Incom Free Corporation. It would be the frontline multi-role starfighter of the New Republic for about 2 decades. And seemed to acquit itself quite well. It wasn't a revolutionary step forward from the T-65, but it didn't need to be. Kind of like the F-16, going from the early F-16A up to the F-16Cs. It was just, incremental improvements, mostly to do with ordnance operations. It also employed a little bit better countermeasures. The original T-65 had chaff and flare. This had it as well, but it also had some somewhat sensor-resistant deflecting paint and a few other things just to make it a little bit more stealthy. But it would be replaced in turn around 25 to 30 ABY by the T-85. And the T-85 would be the frontline fighter of the New Republic before and during the First Order time, but most seem to have been wiped out when the Hosnian system was atomized in The Force Awakens. So why am I holding this instead of a T-85? Well, the T-85 was supposed to be about 15.5 meters long and about 13.5 meters wide, 4 lasers, supposed to be faster at about 1250 to 1300 kph, still a class 1 hyperdrive, still had an astromech. All of these, by the way, have full life support for their pilots and can carry enough provisions for about a week of life support, food, and all that good stuff. They can also all carry a modest amount of cargo, plus even cargo pods under the wings. But anyway, we don't know much about the T-85 because we really don't see it. In Force Awakens, the New Republic fleet is just poof, shot. It's basically one-shotted and never to really be seen. So we don't see the newer, say, Mon Cal cruisers or Corellian corvettes or the T-85 X-Wing. It's mostly just known and referenced. Now, if you look at this, you'll see how the engine intakes here are kind of half-moon shaped. I also think it's interesting how the wings kind of are two pieces that split, not just top and bottom, but kind of side to side. If you notice there, kind of more of a staggered configuration. You look at them put together, you can see it more, how they make two complete circles with a line in the middle, and when they're together they are basically full wings. But when you look at the T-65, they're kind of their own separate circular intakes, and the wings are the same size. You know how an X-Wing looks. But it's interesting about the concept here. It too, like the T-70, has kind of these split intakes. And yeah, just kind of big overarching wings. And the engines are set back on the bottom and stick further back on the top, more like the T-70. Now, the designers of the T-70 for Force Awakens said they really weren't aware of this. It's a little hard to believe considering the similarities in the engines. But on the other hand, you know, who am I? One thing I will say, though, is just because this does look bigger than either the T-65 or the T-70, you could almost use this as a stand-in for the T-85. It would kind of fit in, if you know what I mean. Because of the engines, it looks more modern in terms of the evolution of the design. With this kind of more tapered nose, little small nose, a little swifter looking, and it's supposed to be faster. So in my headcanon, I can almost say that this concept X-Wing is the T-85. What do you think? Again, there's really not a lot of on-screen appearances or information about what is supposed to be the cutting-edge X-Wing. I thought it was kind of interesting. As far as these little models or toys or what have you, the Hot Wheels like this one, The wings don't move. It's pretty solid. It is mostly metal though, which is nice. Perfectly fine X-Wing. Our old titanium here has the opening cockpit. It also has a landing gear that comes down on the bottom. Now this is an earlier one from about 2006. The wings, the S-foils, they don't move. Later ones, they did hinge them, but this one does not. It's heavy metal too. I think even the lasers are metal, so that's nice. It's also interesting how they're kind of on the tips of the wings, whereas on the Hot Wheels, you can see they're more on the edges there versus this one. Just pointing it out for whatever it's worth. These are plastic though. And then of course these from Hot Wheels. This is an earlier one. This is the version with the S-foils closed. Cruising mode. Actually, I think it looks pretty neat because you can see the engines really close together and the intakes forming their full ring. And again, this is essentially the same, but with S-foils open, and it's silver because of the commemorative series. Pretty neat for what it is. And again, the cannons are on the wing tops and bottoms versus like the Hot Wheels. I mean the titanium. Now this one, the concept, it's a neat critter. It's very big. My only complaint is these wings, they do collapse in a bit. But when you do that, they're out of kilter. You can kind of see if you look at the top how they're uneven. And they can really expand out like this. And that kind of puts it out of kilter the other way, although not near as noticeable. But if you kind of lower it to the point there, it's quite even. Honestly, I mean, they make them move, that's one thing, but I think the reason that they do is so it'll fit in the package. Again, this is all the way open, and it's kind of a little bit a kilter, akimbo. Not too bad, but you can notice it if you really look. But when they're collapsed in, it's pretty noticeably off center. I would almost wish they just kind of left them fixed, but again, I think they did this so they would fit in the package, because otherwise when they're fully out, boy, is that a pretty good size thing. I like to leave it kind of here, which there's a stop for it. That seems to be just about right and even. It is a good size though, and it's neat that they did a concept version at all. I like the little, I guess it is a turret on top, whatever that's supposed to be. And then it has the big open thing in the back. I don't know if that's supposed to be a hyperdrive engine or what, but it's interesting. And again, in headcanon, I can almost call this a T-85 because it kind of fits the bill, because the T-85 was supposedly the biggest and fastest version, and that seems to be the case. Anyway, that's pretty much the X-Wing. Not a lot of changes, and it's kind of what I've said in the past about especially the Rebels or the Resistance ships from the new sequel films. They're just very conservative. They didn't want to change much of anything, and that's a shame, because when George Lucas did films, he really would change stuff to keep it interesting. I would have loved to have seen a new X-Wing in basic concept, but progressed by 30 years. The T-65 and T-70 are just so close, frankly. And in specs, too. They don't really seem to have changed the X-Wing a whole lot over its near 40 years of service. But, oh well. Just thought I'd talk about this very iconic little ship again. What do you think? Do you like the new versions? Do you think they're just fine? Do you think they should have gone further? Or do you think they should have just gone to a whole clean sheet design and wholly new, different craft? Let me know in the comments. I appreciate you hanging out for a bit. As always, if you could, like, share, and subscribe, all that other stuff that people say. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.